So after a brief technical interlude, you were talking to me about Hyrox, being a Hyrox celebrity.
Yeah, well, Hyrox athletes, they're a pleasure to work with. They got goals, performance goals. They got a good growth mindset, and I love working with these athletes. Brilliant, brilliant.
So for people who don't know, the uninitiated here, because to the outside looking in, Hyrox to me just looks very much like CrossFit. Is it one and the same? Is it just a new brand that's taken the popularity after CrossFit owner disgraced himself a little bit, or is it something different entirely?
Well, it's similar in respect to the people that participate, the competitors. They're sort of these hybrid athletes, right? They're going to be able to run, they're going to be able to lift weights and do multiple disciplines in one. Yeah. So basically, what Hyrox is, it's running and stations of weights and cardio. All right. So how it goes. First up, everyone's doing the same thing. All right. There's different categories based on levels, and if you're in the pro, then you push heavier sleds, you pull heavier sleds, you lift heavier loads. Okay. But this is the concept how it goes, right? This is how the competition day goes. You do 1K run as hard as you can. You then do 1,000 meters on the ski erg. You then do another K of running. Then you do, 100, 200 kilos sled push for 100 meters or so, 200 meters or so. Then another K run. Then it's a sled pull with the heavy weight. Then it's another K run. Then it's like 1,000-meter rower. Then it's another K run. Then it's all up. You're doing 8Ks of running in 1Ks. And between those, you're doing 8 different stations: rower, ski erg, wall balls, heavy sled push, heavy sled pull, farmer carries, burpee broad jumps, which is a burpee and a jump going forward, and something else. Can't even think what it is right now. Can't remember. But anyway, the average person takes about an hour and 30 minutes to do it. The top elite guys, the top, competitors, they'll do it in an hour. Okay. Now, I've worked with someone who's an elite, top 15 in the world. We took him from 15th to 9th. He did it in 57 minutes. All right. I just finished with someone a couple of weeks ago. He did it in an hour and 32. Okay. So it's hard, man. It's hard work. Like, it's brutal. But them guys love it.
Why do you think there's been a rise of this sort of, you mentioned the hybrid athlete sort of stuff. Why have we seen do you think, working with these people, we've seen a move more towards the generalist in terms of fitness rather than the specialist? We see less and less push for powerlifters, bodybuilders, like real true specialists, to this more general approach to fitness. What do you think that is?
You know what it is, Si? I think as an individual, an athlete, I was once an athlete. I still love to train like an athlete. I think unless we're playing a very high level of sport, we don't need to be specific. All right. You're not a rugby player. I'm not a football player. I'm not a powerlifter. I'm not an Olympic weightlifter. You're not a bodybuilder. We should be generalists. We should be good at anything, whether that's strength, aerobic fitness, anaerobic conditioning, skills. We should be mobile, flexible. We should be able to do it all. I think we should be generalists. We should be good at it all, especially as coaches, because that gives us more things to learn, to then apply to our clients. Okay, make things more interesting, more fun, etc. So I don't know, the shift. I think first of all, Hyrox, it attracts a lot of people that come from an aerobic background. So people that do lots of Ironman, triathlons, marathons, other sort of obstacle races, this sort of stuff. I think it attracts those sort of people, which the ones who are good at Hyrox, they tend to have a very high level of aerobic fitness as well. So they tend to be good at it because, they're good at running. And then it attracts a lot of coaches because there's a lot of coaches that like to lift weights and also be fit and conditioned. I think you're not going to find many powerlifters or bodybuilders wanting to do it, right? So, but I think it's good. Like, I think it's always good to be good at everything. you know.
Hmm.
And
I always
Hyrox,
wonder
yeah,
if there's a. Go on. I always wonder if there's a huge social media component to this as well, because for a number of reasons, I think there is. I think Hyrox has done a very good job of branding and marketing themselves to get out there. But as we spoke about before we came on air, about you watch a video on YouTube and someone's hit you with another algorithm video. Whereas so before, if you got a bodybuilding book, you got a Charles Poliquin Principles book, that's all you'd read. And you'd have to then go hunt for the next thing. So people end up being very specific and niche down in the element of training they started to learn. Whereas now, we are starting to see people who go on YouTube and they're watching a bodybuilding video, and then they get a Hyrox video, and then they'll get a powerlifting video, and then they'll get Olympic lifting video. And then we now have coaches that want content for the gram. And Hyrox always has a photographer, which is very, very good at marketing in itself, to take all those photos for your content for the next year. You know, I think they've positioned themselves perfectly in this mixture of like people who are now seeing different avenues of fitness more frequently, people who want Instagram content looking impressive and filtered. And also with the rise of media, things like Physical 100, we're seeing this, we're naturally as a society more tribal in nature. So the thought of, I'm the bodybuilder, I'm better than you, the crossfitter or the endurance runner. And Hyrox kind of gives you that blend where it's like, well, who is the overall best?
yeah, interesting. And that's the thing with Hyrox. It's always the same. You're never doing anything different. It's always the same weight on the sled push. It's always the same distance on the ski erg and the rower. It's always the same on the running. It's always a K, 1,000 meters, and it never changes. So, like it's something that you can train towards, and then every year or every few months, depending on in season what you want to do, you can always work on it and improve. You know what I mean? So that's the fun part of it.
So, like, going into you saying it's like an hour to an hour and a half, essentially, of training. So, is a lot of the training building around for Hyrox very aerobic in nature?
Well, the reality is it all starts with that aerobic base. You know what I mean? And one of the big problems with Hyrox and just sport in general, or anyone that trains, is they're always thinking about subjective load, right? How hard it actually is, without thinking of the intensity of the objective load. What's the actual goal, right? And well, this is where a needs analysis comes in, right? We test the athlete. We test them to see where they're at. Okay, now if they don't have a sufficient aerobic system, then we work on that. You know what I mean? And if they do have a good sufficient aerobic system, then we work on other areas. So it depends on the individual and where they are in their season or whatnot. But yeah,
So, what would you test for so say someone's watching this and go, oh, I'm interested to get into this Hyrox stuff,
yeah.
and they want to see where they're at. Like, what would you recommend them do? What's the tests they should do to see where that weak link is?
Well, just before we go into that, first and foremost, Hyrox is predominantly an aerobic sport, okay, because of the time that it takes to do it. But it still has elements of anaerobic work, obviously. Okay, you never train in one energy system and not the other. Okay, they intertwine, as we know. But testing someone, there's many ways to test their aerobic capacity. You can do MAS testing, maximal aerobic speed testing, which is a simple 5-minute test, and that basically gives you a measure of MAS is basically the lowest speed that you can maintain VO2 max at. Okay, and then you can plug in your conditioning and how you want to train for it. Okay, so your tests are basically things that will allow you to control your conditioning, just like you do movement screening for people to know whether they can do overhead presses or squats or whatever. You know what I mean? You same with the conditioning. You have to test people. You can do VO2 max testing, lab testing, field testing, performance testing, all different stuff. So it depends on what they have access to and their experience as well. If someone's got access to a lab, I might get them doing a VO2 max test on the treadmill. You know what I mean? Or even a blood lactate test. Okay. But for most people, field tests are probably best. MAS 5-minute test, or they probably have a running background. They probably have some numbers over the last 3 months of their best 5K run, their best 5K threshold. You can use those numbers to then determine what needs to be worked on and stuff like that.
I suppose if you have more data, I suppose this is why you like to work with people a little bit longer term. That you go from very almost it's specific but generic testing. It's VO2 max, these 5-minute tests, and then maybe as you get people, especially with wearable tech, you could probably see where the time leaks are because it is the same every single time. Like you lost time on the run, you lost time on the broad jumps. I was like, okay, cool. This is where our weak link is. Are you looking at that sort of stuff in almost real time?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, so like some of the tests that we go through, like movement screening, overhead squats, clat tests, what's the test called? Thomas test, modified Thomas test, knee to wall tests. Go through all these different tests to see how people move. Okay, see how people move, and then we do some power testing, so broad jump testing. I do some 6 to 10-second sprints on the air dyne, for example, or rower to see how much wattage they can produce. And then I might give them, more glycolytic testing, and then sort of aerobic testing. And then we can sort of map out how they look and then use those tests again in 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 52 weeks time. But then over that period, marking when their competitions are, marking when their holidays are, and then reverse engineer that process backward, just like you would with fat loss or building muscle. Just reverse engineer. This is kind of how we're going to go. This is the plan, but we're going to tweak as we go. And then, okay, this person is well behind with their experience, their running ability. We need to spend 8 weeks building an aerobic base. All right. And then we work on it. We improve, aerobic adaptation involves fuel utilization. Improves fuel utilization and efficiency. So we're going to work on that first, But again, it's experience and what they've been doing, But
so if you mentioned sort of like the go on.
Sorry, we do use real-time data to adjust. Okay, like HRV, morning heart rate, energy, mood, subjective, objective data all the time.
So, like you mentioned aerobic base a few times, and this is almost like that fundamental that you sort of build everything on. So, if you got either a coach looking to train their clients, says, "I'm going to do Hyrox next year," or whether it's just someone that wants to do it themselves, like if you got someone to go right, they haven't got a good enough aerobic base. How do you begin to start training that? Like, how does that training look?
Well, there's a few different ways to train it. It's not just long intensity steady state cardio, which a lot of us think it is, which if you're doing should be 60 to 90 minutes. It can be that for a beginner, someone early in their training career or early in pre-season, it can be that. But it could also be, it could also be tempo runs. It could also be, some form of MAS running, maximal aerobic speed running. There's many different ways to do it. Okay. Generally, what you're going to do from doing aerobic work. So, in order to access anaerobic pathways at specific intensities, you have to build that aerobic base. And that's where a lot of people go wrong. Okay. Because in between weight training sets of heavy squats or power cleans or anything we do, the aerobic system is working for us to replenish energy and recover. So it also allows you to become glycogen sparing so that you can produce more energy through oxidizing fats and carbohydrates and stuff. So there's lots of benefits to building an aerobic base, not just, cardiovascular benefits. All right. You can increase capillary density, which allows for heat and carbon dioxide to leave muscles quicker, which is another benefit. So there's lots of benefits to aerobic training, but it's a fundamental thing that you have to improve as a Hyrox athlete. The reality is the best Hyrox athletes, they all have higher aerobic levels than anyone else. So it's just a fact.
So for people that don't know what they are, for like MAS and tempo intervals, so what does that look like for somebody? Because we not everyone listening to this will be a coach and be like, well, what on earth is that? And they're just going to give people steady state.
So steady state, by the way, steady state is good. You know what I mean? Steady state is good. You're going to, for beginners, it's going to be very beneficial for them, unless they you're working at low intensities. The thing with MAS and those tempo thresholds, you're working at slightly higher intensities, but still in an aerobic zone. So it could be aerobic power intervals. So, for example, let's think about those tempo runs, yeah? 3 to 4 minutes with a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 work to rest ratio. That's the key.
Okay.
And you could do anywhere between 8 to 12 sets. The key is to work at about 70 to 80%. And your heart rate should be about 90%, 80 to 90%. So you're working really hard for short intervals, but for lots of sets, but without the build-up of lactate.
Okay. Yeah.
You don't want to build up lactate because then we're going into that anaerobic zone.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, because I think that's interesting for a couple of reasons, not even just for Hyrox, right? Because one of the big barriers for building aerobic base, which, as you mentioned here, is good for many things, including for fat loss, right? It's substrate availability is really important. Like cell health and mitochondrial health, really important to have that aerobic base.
Yeah.
Yet the biggest roadblock for a lot of people that work with busy professionals is time. So if we can get some of those benefits in less of the time, it might not necessarily always been the perfect approach, but this is where optimal meets practical. Like,
yes.
Moving on to the strength training side of things, like how does a Hyrox program from a strength training look different from your other strength conditioning? Does it? Like, because a lot of people, when you get into this industry, you're very much taught, like, yet people throwing heavy medicine balls like rugby balls, and like we've hopefully all graduated from the school of thought that training needs to look like the sport that you're doing. But this obviously is a weight training environment. So does the training look different?
Yeah, well, it does. Yeah, I mean, like we said, Hyrox is very aerobic based and it's hard, grueling work. It's very high intensity. Okay, repetitive work, running, and then heavy sleds, heavy pulls. So you have to expose your body to that sort of shit. You have to practice and you have to do it. Now, should it be done every day, every week for 12 weeks? Definitely not, because that's not how you train. Smart. Now, do people get away with it? Hell yeah. And there's a lot of people that get away with that when they're young or when they've been doing it for a long time and when they have really good recovery and they're just lucky they can do it and not overtrain and get injured. But over time, those people will break down and get injured or they will overtrain. So that's not the smart way to do it, but it can still take you to a decent level. All right. But as we know, smart training is all about periodization and dipping into certain qualities at certain times, getting the adaptation, and then moving into the next. And maybe microdosing some of it along the way. So, from a strength perspective, when you're far out from competition, whether it's Hyrox, CrossFit, rugby game, MMA fight, football, whatever, the further away you are from your competition, the more general you can be with your strength work. Bench presses, overhead presses, chin ups, large ranges of motion is what you want to train. And as you get closer to your competition, you get a little bit more specific, you shorten the range of motion, you move faster, and then you can use specific type of exercises. So power squats, power cleans, push presses, jerks. Then you may want to use more specific exercises like what you do in your competition. You may want to start running your 1K runs at pace that you're going to run at, or even faster. You may want to use, specific exercises that transfer to the stations that you're going to do. So, for example, a ski erg, you pull from the top to the bottom position. Have you ever done a ski erg before?
Yes.
You pull from high to low. What are the muscle groups that you're using? You're using a ton of lats. You're using a ton of triceps. So as you get closer to your competition, you can start implementing strength exercises that mimic those movement patterns, such as dips, such as chin-ups. And that's not a key to how you train strength for Hyrox. It's just how strength and conditioning is put together. Okay, so further away, you may work on incline bench presses, you may work on flat presses, you may work on floor presses. And as you get closer, the angles do actually become similar to what you're going to do in competition. And the movements get faster.
So, is there an argument there as well for, like, obviously as you start, you're doing the traditional strength training block where you're probably going to be putting your most complex exercises at the start of the workout. Would you play around with order as you get closer? Because for sake of let's say you're doing a push press and it's going to be your A series exercise, but then you're going to be doing this after multiple Ks of runs before you start doing any of these wall balls. So is there an argument then as you get close to the competition that you move that same push press to maybe later in the workout to teach them to how to do it and keep skill at more levels of fatigue?
Yeah, depending on your philosophy and how you like to do it. Like for me, I would have push press right on that last block of training. But then somewhere else in that workout or on another day, I would have a bit more specific work to do, like simulation work where they may just do wall balls instead, just to practice the technique. Obviously, that's important as well to practice the movement pattern. But push presses will be in that last phase of training for sure, or jerks or something if they're advanced, just to teach them rhythm, power transfer, and stuff like that. But specifically, they have to work on those wall balls, otherwise they're going to be fucked.
Do you when you work back with someone, you've got a bit of time, are you sort of like breaking that? We'll use the wall ball for example, but we can translate this into any other lift. But if we look at that, right, we got a squat, we got an overhead press. Like, are you originally, and we're looking at knee extension, would you look at a periodization of program being like that first phase, you break that into individual components? You're squatting, your leg extension, your overhead press, like military presses, and then you bring into like push presses, jerks, things that are more ballistic, and then we start going, right, now let's try and really hammer in more wall balls. Is that sort of how you look at it? Like if I get each individual component strong, the whole becomes strong?
Yeah, definitely, and that's where that initial block is really important to get down. Slow tempos, lots of time under tension, working on injuries or possible injuries that may occur as you get closer to your Hyrox competition. You're going to be doing a lot more running near the competition. You're going to be doing like faster running. You're going to be doing a lot more metabolic conditioning. So we want to make sure the hamstrings are strong. We want to make sure the calves are strong. We want to make sure the scapular retractors are strong, the rotator cuffs, because those are the problematic areas for most Hyrox people that overtrain or don't train properly and get injured, right? They always have hamstring tendinopathies or hamstring tears and things like that. So make sure they're nice, robust, and resilient early on. So long lever bridges, Bosch holds, and lots of posterior chain work. And then teach them how to squat, how to move, depending on their experience level again. And then move closer, move faster, stuff like that.
Would you look at things like daily undulating, periodization, and because talk about hamstring tears as well, right? Like, if we're getting stuff that's more as you get close to that competition, and you're maybe then adding in some more specific work for the Hyrox, would you want to then do a high volume strength training session on the back of some of this skill work? Would you then periodize it so there are certain days of higher intensity, maybe before this heavy Hyrox practice work, and your higher volume shoved away further down the week?
Yeah, it's an option. Yeah, it's an option. Generally, we're like with their tough metabolic work, I'll run that for about 2 to 4 weeks, and that's it. And that'll be about 2 weeks before. Okay, and then we don't really touch it much. We just work on a lot of running. Okay, so they may do a leg workout. After the leg workout or in the PM, they'll do some tempo runs or threshold runs or whatever. And then day 2 is an upper body day. Day 3 is a recovery day where they work on long, steady state cardio. Could be a cycle, could be a swim, or if they need to improve their running, they get out and they get some leg work in on their legs. They could start at half an hour, build to 45, build to 60, build to 75, finish at 90 minutes. Okay. Now, depending on their level, depending on their recovery status, we may add a second day of that or even a third day, okay, if they're not recovering. But generally, I keep it to Wednesdays as a recovery day. I say recovery, but we're actually just building the aerobic system a little bit as well. All right. Thursday, back to a lower body day, which could incorporate some more, So generally with the conditioning, I have one short day of conditioning and one longer day of conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the weekend, I encourage a lot of people to do a 5K run. First week, hard. Second week, easy. Third week, hard. Second week, easy. So we just undulate week to week as well with our 5K run. So 1 week, it'll be a hard threshold run. Go as hard as you can, push the pace. Second week, back off. Maybe practice some nasal only breathing at slower paces. Just do a 5K, keep the legs ticking over. And then third week, push hard again on the 5K. And I just undulate it that way. And then on their recovery day, on the Wednesday, I slowly taper their running volume up. Okay, so just expose them to longer mileage at low intensities. and maybe on Saturday or Sunday. On Saturday is that 5K run. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. And it's interesting, like, talk about undulating those runs in different ways. Like you've built something into somebody's routine, so it's got consistency. But at the same time, we've got something where it's like, right, we can train sort of different stimuluses within that, but it doesn't actually change someone's routine. So if you work with someone who's not a coach and life's not built around this, you're building these systems in place.
Yeah.
I think that's given the guys here like a short, sharp starting point of how to actually start training for Hyrox, which is super interesting. So if people want to train with you for Hyrox, I know you're getting a few clients in for this now, and you've obviously, as you said at the start, got some great results already. Where can people find you?
Stephen Collins Training. Just drop me an email, send me a message, and we can have a chat and see if we're a good fit. And that's it.
I'll also throw in there his YouTube channel, which is also Stephen Collins Training. Am I right?
Indeed. We're building that. Work in progress.
Which is tons of Hyrox stuff already and coming. So definitely give him a subscribe.
There's some good information on there for people. Even if you're not a Hyrox competitor, there's some good stuff in there. People might learn. I'm
going to definitely look at the nasal breathing stuff and sleep stuff directly after this.
Yeah, you should.
But man, pleasure as always, man. And I'll catch you next week.
See you later. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Self-Made Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Before you go, I've got a little favor to ask you. In order for us to grow the show, get bigger guests, get higher production value, and to get more clips of the show out to you guys, we need your support. So if you could give us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. If you prefer to watch your podcast and maybe haven't realized that's an option, head to YouTube and search Simon Kingsley Dutton to subscribe to us there. Also, if you have any further questions about training, nutrition, or just want to chat shop, head to @Kingsley Dutton on Instagram. I'm very active there and happy to answer any and all questions. So until next time, I'll speak to you soon.